Hi, everyone. I'm Tara Lon. Welcome to Time Out with Tinseltown Mom. I'm here today with top parenting expert, podcaster, author, international speaker, and Connected Parenting founder, Jennifer Kolari. Among her many titles, Jennifer is also a child and family therapist with offices in Toronto and San Diego. Today, we're going to talk about steps to repair a broken teen relationship. Hi, Jennifer. Welcome.
Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for being here. I think I should have put comedian. Aren't you a comedian on the side or something like that?
I co-host a podcast with Ed Krasnick, who's a comedian, and we interview comedians and entertainers about their mental health. So I'm the therapist on the show, and I give strategies and actual what to do. So not just talking about mental health, but actually talking about strategies.
Wow, that is so unique. What is the name of that podcast?
The Mental Health Comedy Podcast, and we've had some fantastic guests: Judd Apatow, Mandel, Eddie Pepitone, some really wonderful people. It's a lot of fun.
Oh, wow. I'm definitely going to check that out. So again, thank you so much for being here today. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself? I know I gave a little brief intro, but just tell us a little bit more detail about who you are.
Sure. So I'm a child and family therapist. I'm a social worker, clinical social worker. And I've been working with kids and families for 30 years, probably. And I love what I do. I love kids, and they're weird and wonderful. And, not getting the elevator button first can be a catastrophe, but, they're amazing. And my work is really about connection. It's about helping parents connect to their kids and their teenagers using language and love and compassion and empathy as medicine. The connected parenting really started over 30 years ago when I finished my undergraduate degree in psychology, and then I wanted to do something real. And I ended up working at a group home for street kids. So these were kids who were, traumatized. They'd run away from home. A lot of them had been involved in sex trafficking. Some of them were 11 to 16 years old. They were pretty traumatized. I had no idea what I was doing. I was green as the grass. And in this group home, we were really kind of trained to be quite military and, don't be too soft on the kids. They'll walk all over you. And, in a bedtime, it's just close the door and, leave them. And so none of that made sense to me. These are kids. These are babies who'd been through really difficult things. And I just seemed kind of drawn to the idea that they needed some compassion and some love. And certainly at bedtime, when it was time to put them to bed, I would sit on their beds and I would tell them bedtime stories and I'd sing them lullabies, and they would cry sometimes and I would cry sometimes. But the amazing thing about this connection was the next day, when I needed those kids to do the things that I needed them to do, they were much more likely to do it for me. These were really tough, like scary kids. They were quite behavioral and very intense. And I just noticed this shift in closeness and healthy compliance, and because especially at night, right? These sort of tough kids, the makeup came off and the jammies came on and the teddy bears came out, and they turned back into children who'd been dealing with really difficult things. And so the interesting part was the staff were, she's a bleeding heart. The kids are going to walk all over her. Or this isn't going to work. And that didn't happen. The kids they really responded to this. It was quite extraordinary. And I'll just tell you very quickly, there was one little girl who was quite behavioral, who really responded to this very, very well. She was actually being moved to another setting, and she was saying goodbye to everyone. And I can still remember this like it was yesterday. She was walking down the sidewalk to get into the car with her social worker. She paused. She turned around, she came back up the sidewalks, and she came up to me to put her hands on my cheeks. And she said, "I just want to remember this face, the face of someone who actually cared about me." So for me, that's the moment connected parenting was born. Empathy, compassion, it's powerful. And we all think we do it, but we don't always know how to do it. We don't always feel like doing it. And then my life's work was to understand that and build connected parenting around that.
Wow. Yeah. And I can see that just having that connection with the kid is key. Like you just explained that so wonderfully. So again, today we're talking about how moms can repair a broken relationship with their teen. And just to start, Jennifer, what would constitute a broken parent-teen relationship? There may be some parents thinking that their relationship is broken and maybe it's not really broken. But is there anything, just generally speaking, I guess, that from your experience would constitute a broken relationship?
A really good question. And it's a hard question to answer because I think that the definition is different for everyone.
Yeah.
But me, it's when there really is such damage where there's complete withdrawal, the child not speaking to you, for example. And I've had many situations on my caseload where that's the case. Just tremendous anger all the time. The difficult part is, as hard as this is, a lot of that's normal for teenagers, right?
Yeah.
So I want to I always answer things in a very big way, and then we bring it down to like a sort of micro level. But, for teenagers, they're all about individuating. Who are they different from who are their parents, right? Separating and autonomy and sovereignty and all of those things are incredibly important to teenagers. And as parents, what's important to us is safety, right? And security and making sure they're getting set up for life. And so, when the parent is caring about safety and the teenager is caring about sovereignty and independence, those two things clash. And what's really interesting is the term teenager was only coined in the 1950s. It's actually a Western phenomenon. So in most places in the world, you're a kid and then you're an apprentice adult. But in the West, you're a kid and then you're an adolescent. And that adolescence is getting longer and longer and longer by definition. And so what happens is, in the past, kids would be kids and then they'd want to be an adult. They'd want to impress the adults. They'd want to be part of the adult community. They want to prove they're a man or prove they're a woman. And there was this idea that the adult community would pull them in, but still be able to set limits. Because I always say to parents, you're not actually a parent. You're actually a substitute frontal lobe. So let me explain. The frontal lobe, right? The frontal lobe is a part of the brain that inhibits, organizes, prioritizes, motivates, takes perspective, all those really important higher order thinking functions. And then the midbrain's job is to worry about safety and freaking out and getting mad and getting upset. And so for a long time, when kids are little, you regulate for them. You decide when your child is hungry and you decide when they might need to go to the bathroom, and you're doing most of the regulating for them. And as they get a little bit older, then you're co-regulating. When they're teenagers, they're kind of regulating, but you're right there to help because they're still teenagers, and teenagers are not mini adults. The frontal lobe, the part of the brain that does all of that kind of executive functioning work, prioritizing, motivating, taking perspective, isn't finished developing and won't be until they're about 25. So this is where it gets tricky because you have to be your child's frontal lobe, helping them make decisions, getting them out of bed, getting them to do their homework, all the things that they kind of push back on. At the same time, maintain the relationship. At the same time, help them feel like they're gaining some independence. And their job is to push back. You're mean. You don't get it. Nobody else's parents do this. You're driving me crazy, right? There's this constant battle. And so in answer to the first part of your question, some of that pushing back and slamming the door and go away is developmental. And a natural pushback to the brain function that you're trying to provide for them until they're ready to do it on their own. So the teenagers don't have to be awful and ugly, but they're tricky. And it often happens so quickly that your child goes from, Mom, let me show you this, or Dad, I want to tell you something, to like, what? Slam, right?
It does seem like it happens quickly. Yeah.
It does. And that can feel really hard for us as parents. It can be very painful. It can hurt. And then we get into that place where I do everything for you and you're so rude to me and leave me alone, shut up, and the door shuts. And so there's this constant kind of battling. And without understanding the importance of A, the developmental piece of that and the actual brain piece of that, and B, how important connection is in all of this, you're going to end up with broken relationships. You're going to end up in a place where it's so damaged. You see, it feels so far from what you want it to be that you don't know how to get back. So that's my big answer. And we can break all that down, but these can be tough times.
Yeah. And just getting back to, because that was really powerful what you said. It just helps to understand the dynamic from a kid's point of view when they become teens. I love the apprentice part of it because they are like apprentice adults. I would love to call my teen that instead of a teen. But
love it. Yeah.
Now, do they think in their minds when they become teens or older teens, in their mind, are they thinking that they know it all, or do parents just think they know it all? Like what are they thinking as far as that's concerned?
That's an excellent question. And again, it's a little it's confusing to be a teenager, so you're going to get a bit of a confusing answer because on the one hand, absolutely. Arguing with a 14-year-old is a mind-boggling experience, honestly. That you don't know what's happening in the conversation. They can be so egocentric. They can act like a toddler 1 minute and then act like a teenager the next and act like an adult the next, and then they're back to being a teenager. It's really quite an experience, but they don't know what they don't know. So the part of my job that I love when I work with teens is, especially when they get older and I've worked with them for a while, is to have them go back and visit their 14-year-old self that really did think they knew everything. And that's the hardest part, that they're individuating, and they do to a degree. And if we can remember how we felt at 14 or 15, right? Adults are stupid. They don't know anything. They don't get it. It's a different world now. Like all of that stuff is very real to them. And having said that, this is an important piece too, is that the world really is kind of a mess right now.
Mm-hmm.
What I hear with the teenagers that I'm working is they're mad at us, all of us, parents fighting at, school meetings, and, people can't get along and people are angry and so polarized. They're literally looking at us going, what are you guys doing? Like, who is in charge here? And they're getting afraid. They're quite angry at all of us, that the world is in kind of a mess. And worrying about environmental stuff and what's the world even going to look like, and social media. They're carrying a load that we did not carry when we were teenagers.
Yeah.
So you're adding that onto, including the pandemic, which has certainly affected teenagers. I think that's the group I think that's been the most affected by it.
Yeah.
And I think we'll be continuing to unpack that for a very, very long time. So there's kind of a lot of things going on there. And on the other hand, they do want you to be their frontal lobe. So when I work with teenagers, yes, they're talking about social media and pressures in school and, drugs and all the things that they have to kind of struggle against. But most of the time they're in their sessions talking about their parents. My mom doesn't love me. My dad's always mad at me. They like my sister better. Like, they really need us to be there for them, to have that connection. They desperately need it. They just don't know how to ask for it.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And just so, some moms who are listening, can you just give some examples? Because I know you mentioned, a lot of this is normal as, parents and teens interact. Can you just give some examples of maybe some normal versus not normal interactions with teens?
Yeah, absolutely. And remember, this is all temperament, and there's a lot of different things at play. Not all teenagers act this way, but I think, it's very normal to hear things like, you guys are the meanest parents in the world, and nobody else's parents do this, and you're the only ones who care about this. And there's a lot of that. There's a lot of leave me alone and door slamming, and, taking them places, and they're grumpy and miserable when you take them there, even though you wanted to plan for a nice day. They're, especially in the earlier teen years, as much as they love you deep down, you're embarrassing. Like, you go to the mall and they're like, pretend you don't look at me. It's so normal, and it feels so awful. It really feels terrible to be on the other end of that, because we love our kids so much and we do so much for them, to be sort of treated that way. And that's a big trigger for a lot of us as parents. How dare you speak to me that way after all I do for you? And that can be really painful I'll talk a little bit about boys and girls because they're a little bit different. Boys tend to go into what I call the caveman stage. And that's around 14. It starts 13. It can start by 14. It starts to peak 15. It's like they're fully into it. And that's where everything is, you're annoying and what, and how was your day? And the answer is, ugh. That's not even a sentence. Mm-hmm. There's not even a word in there, but that's how they talk. A lot of get out and leave me alone, and, not wanting to shower and not wanting to do things that they used to want to do, getting very sucked into video games at this stage, procrastinating around homework and sort of dragging themselves around like there's, bricks tied to their feet. And that can really spike parents' anxiety. Oh my God, what's going to happen? They don't have any life skills. They're not going to get anywhere in life if they're like this. And it really is, for most kids, primarily a stage. And you can, support them through that stage, and you can set some limits around that, and we can talk about it. But it is sort of have to kind of wait for that stage to pass. And for teenage boys, it's usually around 17. And that's when the frontal lobe starts coming on, and they start to understand perspective. And, oh, you know what? My mom really does a lot for me. And it really was kind of rude of me to talk to my dad that way. And then they kind of come out of it. And for girls, it starts at about 12. They start a little earlier, and I call it the ugh phase. It's like, ugh, what? Like, it's just there's a lot of door slamming and what do you want and get out and eye rolling, which can be very triggering for us as parents, and very hurtful. And for girls, they do a lot of retreating, a lot of kind of connecting to their friends, a lot of sort of rejecting of us, often the moms most particularly. And this is where the breakdown can happen with both teenage boys and teenage girls, is we start to get angry and they get angry at us. And then anytime we're speaking to them, it's about what they have to do. And, they've been in their room. So when they come out, it's like, did you do that homework? And what about the dishes? And you're in your room all the time. And what about this? And then they don't want to come out. If that's what's going to happen when they come out, well, they're going to stay in their room. Right. So this is the age where, as hard as it may seem and as painful as it may seem, this is where connection is the most important. Because you want them to come out of the room so that you have that connection. So they want to come out of the room to feel that sense of connection and love from you. And this is where you have to be your own frontal lobe here and just trust that this is a stage. It's not a fun stage. It's an ugly stage, but it is part of development. And you'll get through it. You will. So girls pop out around 16. And 15, maybe closer to 16, and boys pop out at 17.
Okay. And this is all normal and healthy, what you're talking about right now, these examples?
Yep. And it can get worse based on how you handle it as a parent. And it can get worse, obviously, if there's other things going on for the child, right? If, they have anxiety or they're being bullied or there's an eating disorder, like there's other things that can, certainly contribute. But if you just took all of that away, it is quite normal for kids to just find you embarrassing and annoying in the middle of these teenagers. And it really is painful, but it is a stage and kids pop out. And that's my favorite part of the job is when parents are like, I didn't believe you, but it's amazing. And it really does happen.
So what are some examples of some not so healthy interactions that, things that parents should be concerned about? Like those are normal interactions, parents will go through with their teens.
So I think, anything to the extreme of that, right? Your kids stopping doing things that they, stopping to do things that they really enjoy, really closing not just you off, but other friends off as well. Really sort of procrastinating on absolutely everything. Not changing eating habits, sleeping habits. Although having said that, during the pandemic, so much of this happened anyway for teenagers, and they're sort of in some really bad habits at the time. Mental health issues are really on the rise. And I just heard the statistic that during the pandemic, for example, teenage psychiatric hospitalizations were up, I think 51%, which is pretty extreme.
Oh, wow. That is very extreme.
Yeah, it's very extreme. And so it's hard to tease out what is normal from what is a mental health issue. And so I think the best way to answer that is I can give you some strategies that you can try that your teenager should respond, so that if it's behavioral versus a mental health issue, you're going to see some changes pretty quickly. And if it really seems to be an ongoing problem and you're worried, then it really is important to talk to your child's pediatrician, reach out to a family therapist, or get your child a therapist or a parenting coach or their own kind of life coach, and get some help, get some support if you can.
Yeah. And I love that you mentioned the connection piece and that's your whole philosophy. What's some examples? Let's say there's a parent listening and they want to connect with their teen, maybe just using some of the examples you gave, and maybe they're like, whatever, get out of here. How can parents choose not to be triggered, I guess? I mean, I don't know if that's the right terminology, but I'll just say it. How could they choose not to be triggered in that moment and maybe find a connection moment instead?
Of course. So let me get the big answer to that, and I'll get down to actual strategies for parents. So one of the things that we have to know is through connection, some really beautiful reward chemicals flow into the brain, which literally are absorbed into every cell of the body, help with brain growth, reduce cortisol, which is the stress hormone in the body, strengthens neuroplasticity, actually helps kids learn better. It is so connection next to food and water is the most important thing for your child's brain development, mental health, and social health. So I'll give you a quick example. When your child is a baby, they're a little tiny little baby. We quite naturally mirror. So the foundation technique at Connected Parenting is a technique called mirroring, or what I call the calm technique, which allows you to deeply, deeply connect with your child and then have those beautiful reward chemicals flood the body. So when a little baby's crying and they're 4 months old and you've just taken them out of the bath, nobody would go to the baby, oh, you know what, you've had a bath every night. I don't know why you're still crying. It's fine. And hurry up. Like, nobody would talk to a baby like that, right? You pick up the baby and you go, oh my goodness, look at you. You're cold and your little lips are quivering. The baby has no idea what you're saying. But the baby sees on your face a perfect representation of what they are feeling inside, which stimulates the mirror neuron cells in the brain and release oxytocin. Oxytocin is very powerful hormone / neurotransmitter that does all of those amazing things that I just told you. Blocks cortisol, strengthens the immune system, speeds up neuroplasticity, and you get the same bounce back. So when you have these deep connections with your infant, that is actually how the brain grows. That's how the infant brain grows. Most of brain development happens outside of utero. So when kids are really little, that's when there's a massive amount of brain growth happening. When they're teenagers, there's another surge in brain growth, right? Almost to the degree that the brain is making connections when they're babies. So connection is important all the way along, but it's especially important for teenagers. So I teach parents how to speak to their kids, how to talk to your children, how to use language and conversation as medicine. And then that creates safety and connection. So when you have to set limits, and you have to because you're a frontal lobe, and teenagers need limits too. They want them and they crave them. But they want them in a predictable, loving way instead of a yelling, screaming way. When you're able to do that, that's how you repair. That's how you create the connection. And that's how you build emotional resilience and emotional shock absorbers so your teenagers can handle all the really rough stuff that is happening out there. So it's hard to capture in a short amount of time, but I'll do my best. And if people are interested, I can tell them how to find out more information.
Yes.
So the calm technique looks like this. It looks like putting your own agenda aside. And how dare they speak to me this way? And they haven't done that assignment yet, and I just got an email from that teacher. It's you take in what's happened, you breathe, you ground yourself. And if we have time, I can give parents some strategies on how to stay neutral. You take your agenda, you put it aside. I promise you that you get to bring it back, but the connection is first and foremost. You deeply listen. It's really about getting on your child's channel. It is not about agreeing. It is about getting. So let's say, let's use a scenario. Let's say your daughter's having a hair fit. And she's late for school and she's screaming and yelling because her hair didn't turn out the way you want, right? And as a parent, that's so triggering. It's like, oh, if you just wake up earlier, this wouldn't be a problem. Or I can't believe you're doing this again and we're going to be late now. And all of this stuff that kind of happens. This is a very simple example, but it's a good one to break down. So typically we engage our teenager by saying, cut it out. You look fine. This is ridiculous. Like, why don't you just leave yourself more time in the morning? And you know how that's going to what they're going to respond back with. They're going to leave me alone and you don't get it and you're so mean and I hate you. And there's going to be a whole kind of escalation, right? And the more they escalate, the more upset we're going to be. Don't you talk to me like that. This is, horrible behavior. I never talked to my parents like this. If I ever did, there'd be, and you end up with this kind of explosion. Now, one of the brain things that's really important here is because the teenage brain is underdeveloped, it's still developing. Part of how they regulate is by getting us mad. Okay. So when they get us mad and we are not neutral, they get a blast of adrenaline. Adrenaline is a stimulant, just like ADHD medication. So they get a blast of adrenaline, which lights up their frontal lobe, helping that brain to do the job that it needs to do, move through a task, take perspective, all of the things all of those executive functioning tasks the brain needs to do. So they often get us really mad, get a jolt of adrenaline and feel a little better and can move on with their day. And then we're dish rags on the floor. So we have to make sure that we're not sucked into that, as a way that our kids use to regulate their own brain. So let's go back to the hair example. Look at my hair. It's so ugly. I can't go to school. Big trigger for us as parents, right? What do you mean you can't go to school? Put a hat on. You got to go to school. So now you got to ground yourself. You've taken a breath. You've decided you're going to respond to your child instead of react. And you say, you know what, you look beautiful to me. But I know you don't want to hear that. And I get it. Your hair just seems to have a mood of its own. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't work. You have an exact idea of how you want it to look today. It is not cooperating. Now what happens is now your child's nodding and going, yeah, I have the stupidest hair. And now you're having a conversation where you're getting your child. You're not talking them out of anything, because if you try to talk them out of it, they're going to talk you into it. That's how it works. They're now getting oxytocin and serotonin, which are reward chemicals that flood the brain, bringing the brain out of fight or flight and into a oxytocin-based conversation. And as much as this sounds like it's so silly, honestly, it is a superpower. When you learn how to do this, 2 or 3 statements will calm your child right down. They might want to hug, they might go fine, and then they'll huff and they'll be downstairs, but you'll get your child downstairs feeling better by connecting that way versus getting mad and starting to threaten them, and you're going to be late and you do this to me all the time and blah, 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 right? Mm-hmm. If they get really ugly, if it's really awful, there can be a consequence, and you can deliver that consequence in a really loving way. I love you and I love you enough for you to be mad at me, but because you did this, this, and this, now here's the consequence. You're mean. I hate you. I know. And I love you enough for you to be mad at me. I believe in you. I know that you can do better than this, and you're a good person, and it's my job to be your frontal lobe. It's my job to help you make good decisions. And that's the consequence. So the more neutral and the more calm you can stay, the more they start to regulate.
And do you give them the consequence in that moment, or do you think that might escalate the situation?
That would escalate. I usually recommend front loading that. So let's say the whole morning was a nightmare and she was rude and nasty and it didn't go well. Later that day, you go back and you can repair. So let's say you lost it too and it just was ugly. It was just a whole bunch of ugly. You can later in the day use the calm technique, which I'll break down in a second. Sorry, I realize I haven't broken that down yet. And say, you know what, this morning when you were freaking out about your hair and I got so mad and I was just shouting at you to hurry up, I didn't stop and think about what that felt like for you to look in the mirror, not like what you see. It's such an intense environment, and you think everyone's looking at you, and I get it. And I was so angry this morning. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to try to understand the next time that happens. But if you get really nasty and start saying the things that you said, I love you enough to set some pretty loving limits here. You're going to lose your phone for 24 hours or 48 hours. I don't like having parents take away things for 2 weeks and a month. It's too much. It's too heavy a consequence for the situation. And it's much better that you take it away for a short time, then they get it back. If they repeat the same behavior, they lose it again. They still might lose it for a month, but It will be because time they chose that behavior. Right. So let me break down the calm technique. The first thing you're going to do is see. That's where you're going to connect. That's where you're going to try to find your 16-year-old self who was having a bad hair day or couldn't go to that party or was overwhelmed by school, whatever it is that they're yelling about. Find that place inside where you can connect with your 16-year-old self. Then you put your agenda aside and then you match their affect. So if she's screaming about her hair, instead of saying, you look beautiful, what are you talking about? It looks the same as it did yesterday, which is going to make them go, no, it didn't. You don't know what you're talking about. And you have to say that. You're my mother. You're going to say something like, you know what? You do look beautiful, but I can see that this is not turning out the way you want. You had a very specific idea of how you wanted your hair to look, and it doesn't look like that. See, can you hear the urgency in my voice? Mm-hmm. That's what gets reflected back, showing your teenager that you get it. You get it. You're not trying to argue with them. You're not trying to talk them out of it. You get it. There's empathy there. That's when you get the release of those beautiful reward chemicals. And that's when the conversation can start to de-escalate. It's a superpower. I'm not kidding.
Mm-hmm. That's great.
That's the affect matching, right? Then you move on to the L part, which is where you can choose your words. You can summarize. Oh my God, sweetie, this seems to happen like so many times in a week. This is not the first time your hair has done this to you. You can clarify what part of your hair didn't turn out? Like what part is it that is just being so stubborn, right? You can paraphrase. I have the worst hair in the world. It never works for me. I'm going to look ugly. Everyone's going to laugh at me. So, oh my gosh, so you're feeling like it's so bad today. It's just a disaster. And everyone's going to be looking at you, right? You sort of say the same thing back, but with a little twist to it. And then you can wonder out loud, because maybe it's not about the hair. Maybe it's about a boyfriend who just broke up with her, or a group of friends that have left her out. I get it. Your hair looks, you don't like the way your hair looks, but I'm wondering if also part of the reason you're so sad is what you told me about yesterday with your friends. So the final stage of this, if you once you've put all of that together and you've done it from a place of love, not fear, that's the M. That's the mirroring. Right. And so the other key to this is when you parent from fear, oh my God, I get her out of the door. This is crazy. She has no ability to regulate. She's so dramatic. Whenever you're trying to change a behavior because you're afraid for your child, they're going to pick that up. It's going to add to the emotional atmosphere and it's not going to work. When you parent from a place of love, I love you. I can see, I get it. You're really frustrated. Your hair is not turning out the way that you want, but I believe in you. I know that you can get through this. I know that you do get through this. I love you. I'm going to give you some time to figure it out and walk away. That's when you're going to give them that emotional confidence and that resilience to be able to manage those things and regulate those things on their own. And so the breakdown, which is the whole part of the conversation, is when do relationships break down so much that there's nothing, it's so frayed. And that's when things never get resolved. There's never really a lot of listening happening. And you'll know because your kids will be saying that to you. You never listen to me. You never understand me. You don't get it. They say that all the time. Mm-hmm. Right. And so now it's the time to start showing them, I'm going to try. I might not get it right. So sometimes you'll do this. Sometimes, and it's a very, as powerful and incredible as this technique is. And by the way, you don't have to just use it on your teenagers. It works on husbands and wives and neighbors and siblings and colleagues and bosses and nasty shopkeepers. It really is a pretty incredible superpower to have. It takes a lot of practice and even just trying. Like if you try it and your kid's like, what are you doing? What book are you reading now? Like, then you just say, I'm trying to listen. I realize I don't always listen to you. I talk at you a lot. And I tell you I understand, but I'm not sure I'm doing such a good job at that. And watch what your teenager will do.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, those are great techniques. Now, are these things that you teach in one-on-one therapy, or do you have courses that you teach these
that's such
skills?
A question. Yeah. Yes to all of these. So we have a whole team. There's a team of us at Connected Parenting. There's about, I think, 11 or 12 of us that are all trained in the model. Because there's so much more to it than what we just talked about today. And one-on-one, you can learn it from one of our coaches. We also have an online course where you can just learn it from the on-demand videos, or there's a version where you have the online videos and a Facebook group and live coaching calls with me. And then we have a really amazing program called the Role Play Playground, and you don't have to be in the parenting online masterclass to join this. So we really are proud of this because we want it to be very affordable for parents because not everybody can afford one-on-one therapy. Like that's a lot for families. And this is, I think it's $69, but you get 4 weeks with a connected parenting therapist in a parenting group where you're practicing these techniques and getting lots of parenting advice and support from an amazing community and a Facebook group as well. And that's a pretty good option. So there's, and the podcast, if you don't have money and you can't pay for anything, listen to the podcast. I give lots of free content away for families. My philosophy is if we can't figure it out in our own families, how on earth are we going to figure it out as a country, as a planet? So I kind of think like if we can add these beautiful, loving techniques, one family, one household, one child at a time, that's how we're going to change the world.
Yeah, because you're teaching these techniques to your children and they're going to go into the world, have their own kids and, practice these techniques. So, I mean, it's worth it, investing.
It is. And you know what's so interesting? You don't have to teach your kids this. If you parent them this way, they will naturally and intuitively absorb it. Mm-hmm. So they naturally go out into the world with this incredible superpower of their own. And I mean, we could spend hours on the technique and the benefits, but there really are two parts though. There's a connection part, right? And then there's the frontal lobe part where you actually do have to set loving limits for your child. And when you don't set limits, that creates anxiety as well. So for parents out there really struggling with what they think is a broken relationship with their teen, it could be just developmental, which we talked about, but this is the technique, right? Using this technique. And I don't want parents to just wait for their kid to have a freak out to use it. Use it when they're just chatting. When they go into the fridge and like, who ate all the chocolate milk, who drank all the chocolate milk? Instead of going, you did. And how about leaving some for someone else next time? You go, you know what? I hate that when you have a craving and you think something's there and it's not, and then just walk away. Have these little It's where your child goes, what? That felt kind of good.
Yeah.
I like that. I'm going to come back for more. Right.
Yeah.
And the other piece is baby play. And this is going to sound so crazy, but rubbing noses and you're still my baby, even though you're 16, and showing them pictures of when they were little and telling them stories about when they were little. They love it. Absolutely love it.
They do.
And they do. And if you have a teenager that's like, you're hugging them or rubbing nose and like, oh my God, what are you doing? Don't do that thing where you're like, I hope you have a teenager one day and they do this to you and you can feel like it, how this feels for me. You just go, you know what? I get it. You're 16. That's weird, but I love you and you're still my baby. And then walk away without guilt. Don't guilt them. Don't get dramatic. And watch what happens. I guarantee you a few minutes later, they'll come in, they'll give you a little bump. There'll be an armor over the shoulder. They'll be like, okay, fine. You can have one hug. Like they'll come back for these little connectors. So for parents who are really trying to repair that connection, that's the way I would say to do it.
That's so good.
Yeah, they're delicious and they're good for us. They're good for the mama and the dad too, who's really struggling. These are hard years.
Yeah. Now, just for those kids who are kind of mouthy and, they get smart with their parents, not in a good way, but now should parents correct that every time? Let's say it's like they're asking their child, oh, do you want to eat dinner now? No, I already told you I don't want to eat dinner. You know what I mean? They're just kind of mouthy. Should they correct that every time or should they ignore it in this parenting approach?
Yeah. So I would say you would never ignore it, but how you deal with it is actually really important, right? So if you say, don't you dare talk to me like that, if you shoot back the way they've just come at you, we already know how that's going to go. It's not going to be pretty. And nobody really ever learns that way. Like if you think about it, has there been a time in your life where you have been yelled at or screamed at or reprimanded and you've gone, oh my goodness, thank you so much. That's fantastic. I'm going to go fix that. Has that ever happened to you?
No.
Would it ever happen to you?
Probably not.
Because your frontal lobe is going to shut off, right? Your midbrain is going to come on and you're going to go into fight or flight. And you're going to start like fighting. You're going to start protecting yourself. You're going to start defending yourself and it's going to get ugly, right? So the idea is you mirror first, even though they're screaming at you. What was the example you gave me?
Just them being kind of mouthy and let's say you say, do you want to eat dinner now? They're like, no, I already told you I don't want to eat dinner. Maybe stop asking me. I don't know. I'm just making something up.
So then if we apply the calm technique to that, it would be, you know what, I get it. You're doing stuff. I'm always bugging you about something. I mean, it's dinner, but I get that you're super irritated by me sometimes, but I love you. And that didn't feel great the way you said that to me, and then leave. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Or you could say, you know what, you're a much better person than that. You're so good to your grandparents. You're so nice sometimes that can't feel right to you, that you just spoke to me like that. And then get out of there. Get away. Move.
Yeah.
Don't stand there seeing if it had an effect. Like, get away. And then what will happen is your child then doesn't reflect on your behavior. Because when you start screaming and you walk out, no kid is going to go, oh, I can't believe I did that to my poor mom. They're going to sit there going, she's so horrible and she's so mean. She's such a, right? That's what they're going to do. You're going to walk away and they're going to be reflecting on your behavior instead of their behavior. So we're actually getting in our own way when we do that.
Mm-hmm.
So if you stay neutral and you respond that way, then they're going to sit in their room. There's nothing for them to reflect on except their own behavior. And they're going to go, yeah, that was kind of crappy. And then you'll get a text, sorry, or then they'll come out and say, I'm sorry. Like, honestly, this is the way to go. It is very counterintuitive, pretty much the last thing you're going to feel like doing, because you're going to feel like getting mad. You're going to feel like reacting.
Right.
But this is the way that heals relationships. This is the true way that communication happens. This is how you build emotional shock absorbers. This is how you strengthen a relationship. Because especially in those teenage years, there's so much they're struggling with. There's so many decisions they have to make. And if you're dropping your kid off at, let's say, a party, and you're screaming at them the whole time, you better be smart and don't, if I find out that, and they get out of the car and they're mad, and somebody says, hey, you want to try this? What do you think they're going to do? They're going to try it. And if you're, I love you, I believe in you, I know how strong you are, you've got a good sense of what's right and what's wrong. And if you have trouble at this party and there's stuff that you're not comfortable with, send me a little text. We can have a little signal and I'll come get you. Now they walk into the party and somebody says, hey, do you want to try this? And now what are they likely to do? Turn away from it or try it a little bit and then be like, you know what? I don't want to do that to my mom. I don't do that to my dad.
Mm-hmm. Now, what about those moms listening that they feel guilty because of how they've parented up to this point? Like, do you have any words of wisdom or
You
advice?
ask such you ask me.
Well, you're such a wealth of information. I'm like, I just want to keep you here for hours.
Oh, so here's the thing. It's never too late. It's never too, I don't care if your kids are 30. You can always start right now doing it this way. And the repair doesn't take as long as you think. You'll feel so much better about your own parenting. Like you'll put your head on the pillow at night and feel better. I mean, so many mamas and dads out there, they try to fall asleep at night and they just worry about their kids, or they relive arguments that they've had with their kids, or they cry their eyes out. I promised myself I wasn't going to yell, and then I yelled all day again, right? Or just that pit in your stomach. There's nothing like it as a parent when you're worried about your child and whether you're preparing them enough for life. Parental anxiety is a thing.
Yeah.
Right. And teenagers can be so nasty and so abusive, honestly. So the truth is it's never too late. You can do it right away. I'll tell you a very quick story and then I probably have to run. But I was doing a talk years ago for a group of teachers, actually. It was a 2-day workshop. And I was talking about the baby play, like the kind of telling them they're little babies and telling them stories when they're babies. And one of the women in the group basically started laughing out loud. And I said, what's so funny? And she said, well, my kid's a goth. Okay, so if I do that, my kid is going to puke on me. I'm not going to do that. And I've been doing this so long and I'd seen so many amazing responses over the years that I basically said, you know what, just go home and try it. Your relationship is already really frayed. It's already really broken. They've been in a very bad place for months, years, actually. So she goes home. Her kid is, I think he has Doc Martens on the coffee table. He's playing video games. He's screaming and yelling. And they're so toxic sometimes when they're playing video games. And he hadn't done the dishwasher and he hadn't done his homework. And she would normally come in and go, what are you doing with your boots on the coffee table? And why do you have to be so loud? And what about the dishwasher? And what about your homework? And he'd say, shut up. You bug me. Get out. That whole thing. And so this day she thought, well, I'm going to try something else. Let's see how this goes. So she came in and she said something about his video game. And then, I don't know, he had paused it for a second. And she said, you know what? I know you're a goth, but you're the cutest little goth in the whole wide world. And for some reason, it just caught him so off guard that they both just kind of fell into it. And then a few seconds later, they were like, that was weird. Now what? But she said they went on to have the nicest night that they'd had in a very, very long time. And that night, she had long stopped tucking him in. The connection was very, very broken. She was walking past his room about 11 o'clock at night. He's about 16 or 17, I think. And what does she hear? Mommy, will you come tuck me in? So she couldn't breathe. She couldn't believe that it was happening. She went in. She rubbed noses with him. She pulled the blankets up. She said she was afraid to even believe that this was happening. Then she walked out of his room, closed the door, slid down the wall, and burst into tears. Because they're what? They want that. They do. They crave it. They need it. They just don't know how to ask.
Yeah.
They just don't know how to ask. And the other thing that's so important is the teenage brain is so bad. They put teenagers in MRI machines. They are so bad at reading facial expressions. They are so off. They will see judgment when there's no judgment. They will hear yelling where there's no yelling. They did a study where they showed teenagers different facial expressions, and they did it with adults, and adults were pretty accurate. Teenagers were abysmal. The frontal lobe does not interpret nonverbal language, tone of voice, facial expressions very well as teenagers, which is why they're always freaking out at you and acting like you just at them when you haven't even said anything yet. Right. So we could talk for hours. Honestly, it's a wonderful time because teenagers can be so interesting.
Yeah.
And you see them develop their own ideas and their own opinions and their sense of humor and their sense of self. It can be absolutely delightful. And then it can be so painful and so scary and so hard. So, I mean, our job is really just to support parents and help them in any way that we can, get through this. And the younger your child is, the better, because then you get good at this by the time they're teenagers. But to answer your question in a very long-winded way, it is never too late.
Oh, yes. Great. That's great. And thank you so much, Jennifer. You're just such a wealth of information. I know you also have 2 parenting books. I don't know if you can just mention the names really quickly.
Yeah. Connected Parenting, How to Raise a Great Kid. And then the U.S. title is How to Set Loving Limits. And the other book is a teenage book called You're Ruining My Life, which is, I think, pretty accurate. And they're available in books on Amazon. And you can go to the website, connectedparenting.com. We have access to all that information. And then I have the Connected Parenting podcast, which is a wealth of information, and the comedy podcast that we mentioned at the beginning. So.
Okay, wonderful. So that's where we can find you, connectedparenting.com, for everything concerning you. Okay, perfect. Thanks for listening to Time Out with Tinseltown Mom. If you liked what you heard today, please be so kind and rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes, because when you do that, you get this podcast in front of more listeners. And I want to offer more encouragement to a wider audience. So any positive reviews that you can give would be so helpful. Until next time.